The CEO thought he was alone on the top floor, until he heard a whisper from the dark. "Please, don't tell my stepdad." In that moment, Adrian realized this was no ordinary trespass. This was a cry for help. The office was quiet except for the soft hum of the city beyond the glass. Adrian Vale had been working late again, the glow of his laptop screen painting his face in cold light. The rest of the building had emptied hours ago, leaving the top floor in silence. He was about to shut everything down when he heard it. A faint sound, like the rustle of fabric or the shifting of small feet. It wasn't loud, but it didn't belong here. He stood and listened, his eyes scanning the dim corners of his office. The sound came again, from the direction of the closet in the far corner. For a moment he wondered if it was a mouse, or perhaps something shifting in the air vents, but this was a secure floor. No one came in or out without clearance. Crossing the room, he reached for the closet handle, his movements slow and deliberate. When he opened the door, his heart caught in his throat. Inside, crouched low and gripping a worn canvas backpack, was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 12. Her long hair was tangled, her clothes rumpled, her sneakers scuffed and dirty. Wide brown eyes stared up at him, full of fear. She didn't speak right away, only pulled the backpack tighter to her chest, as if it were a shield. Adrian's voice came out softer than he expected. "What are you doing here?" Her lips trembled before she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Please don't tell my stepdad." The words were strange, almost out of place, but the fear in them was real. Adrian's first instinct was to call security, to find out how she'd gotten past the multiple locked doors and guards. But the way she looked at him, pleading, tense, ready to bolt, made him pause. He crouched down so they were closer to eye level. "You're not supposed to be here," he said gently. "This is a private office. How did you get in?" She shook her head, refusing to answer, her eyes darting toward the door, as though expecting someone else to appear. Adrian noticed the faint shadow of bruises along her wrist, where her sleeve had ridden up. His chest tightened. "You're safe right now," he said, though he wasn't entirely sure it was true. "No one's going to hurt you here." The girl stayed silent, but her grip on the backpack eased just enough for him to see a frayed patch sewn onto it. It was the kind of bag that had been carried for years, maybe through moves, maybe through things she didn't want to talk about. Adrian realized he was staring. He straightened slightly, trying to keep his tone calm. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then murmured, "Lily." "Okay, Lily," he said. "I'm Adrian, and I'm not going to tell anyone you're here. But you have to tell me why you're hiding in my office." Her answer was barely audible, but it sent a chill through him. "Because it's the only place he won't look." Adrian stayed crouched in front of the open closet, his mind racing with questions. The girl sat curled in the corner, still clutching the worn backpack to her chest, her eyes fixed on the floor, as if she could disappear if she didn't look at him. He wanted answers, needed them, but he could see that pushing too hard would only make her retreat further. "Lily," he said, keeping his voice low and steady, "you can't just hide in my office. This is the top floor of a secure building. No one gets up here without clearance. How did you get in?" She shook her head quickly, a tiny movement, and muttered, "I can't tell you." "Can't or won't?" he asked, trying to keep frustration out of his voice. Her fingers tightened on the straps of her backpack. "I'll leave soon," she said softly. "Just don't call anyone. Please don't tell the police. And please don't tell my stepdad." Adrian leaned back slightly, studying her. She looked young but carried herself with the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily. There was dirt smudged on her cheek and a tear in the knee of her jeans. She didn't look like she had wandered in here by accident, and her urgency in asking him not to call anyone made his instincts sharpen. "You're telling me you somehow made it into my penthouse suite, into my private office, without anyone stopping you?" he said slowly. And you think I'm just going to let you walk out without an explanation? She lifted her chin a little, enough to glance at him. I'm not here to hurt you. I just needed somewhere safe for a little while. That's not an answer, he said, but there was no edge in his tone now. Lily's gaze flicked to the office door, then back to him. If you call security, they'll ask questions. If you call the police, they'll tell him where I am. And if that happens… She trailed off, swallowing hard, her knuckles white around the fabric of her bag. Adrian felt a knot form in his stomach. Whoever this stepdad was, Lily was terrified of him. Her fear wasn't the kind that came from getting caught doing something wrong. It was the kind that came from knowing what would happen if she was found. I can't just ignore this, he said quietly. You're a kid, and you're hiding in an office in the middle of the night. That's not normal. She gave a small, bitter laugh, the kind that sounded far too old for her age. Normal doesn't really happen where I live. Adrian stayed silent for a moment, then stood and extended a hand toward her. Come out of there. I'm not calling anyone right now, but I need you to talk to me. Lily hesitated, then slowly uncrossed her legs and stepped out, still holding the backpack close. She stopped a few feet from him, like she was ready to run if she had to. 5 minutes, she said. I'll tell you what I can. Then I'll be gone. Adrian led Lily toward the seating area by the wide windows, the city lights stretching out behind them in a glittering maze. She moved like someone who wasn't used to being in open spaces, every step cautious, her eyes flicking to the corners of the room and the door. He gestured for her to sit on the leather sofa, but she stayed standing, clutching her backpack like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. He tried to keep his tone even, though a dozen questions were pushing at his mind. You look like you haven't eaten in a while. Do you want something? Water at least? She shook her head quickly, and in the movement, her sleeve slipped just enough for him to notice the marks. His gaze caught on them before he could stop himself. Dark bruises circling her wrist, fresh enough that the skin was still swollen in places. What happened there? He asked, pointing slightly. She pulled her sleeve down fast, eyes dropping to the floor. Nothing. Lily, he began, and his voice was sharper than he intended. The effect was immediate. She flinched back like he'd reached for her. Adrian froze, realizing the mistake. The panic in her reaction wasn't mild discomfort. It was reflex, the kind someone develops over time. He forced his voice softer. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm worried. She didn't look at him, instead scanning the room again, her gaze darting from the glass doors to the hallway as if she expected someone to come crashing in at any second. It was like she couldn't let herself settle. Even in the safety of his office, her body was tense, ready to run. He stepped away from her, giving her space, and poured a glass of water from the small bar near his desk. Setting it on the coffee table, he said, It's here if you want it. You don't have to drink it, but you're safe in here. No one can get in without going through me first. Her eyes flicked to the glass, then back to him. You don't know him, she murmured. Your stepdad? He asked carefully. She gave the smallest nod. Adrian sat in the armchair across from her, resisting the urge to push for more. If he pressed too hard, she'd shut down completely. He'd seen it happen with people in business negotiations, and the look in her eyes now was even more guarded than any rival CEO he'd ever faced. You don't have to tell me everything tonight, he said, but I need you to know that whatever's going on, you're not alone right now. Her shoulders lowered just slightly, but she didn't relax. She glanced toward the shadows near the door again before whispering, He always finds me. The words landed heavy in the room. Adrian realized then that this wasn't just a runaway hiding for a night. This was someone running from a fear that had been chasing her far too long. And for the first time in years, he felt the quiet panic of not knowing if he could fix it. Adrian leaned back in his chair, watching Lily from across the room. The water he had poured for her still sat untouched on the table, the glass fogged slightly from the cold. She hadn't moved much, except to shift her weight from one foot to the other, her backpack still clutched to her chest as if it was the only safe place in the world. He was trying to piece together how she had even managed to get this far. The building was known for its tight security, with guards at every entrance and elevators that required a coded card to reach his floor. Even his employees needed clearance to come up here after hours. He decided to ask her directly. "Lily, you know this isn't the kind of place people can just walk into. How did you get here?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the floor before she looked back at him. "I used a badge," she said quietly. "A badge?" he repeated, narrowing his eyes. "What kind of badge?" "A staff one," she answered, her tone flat, like she knew she was confessing to something serious. Adrian felt his pulse quicken. "Where did you get it?" She shook her head. "I can't tell you." "Can't or won't?" Her lips pressed together. "It doesn't matter. I needed somewhere no one would look." The weight of her words settled over him. No one would look. That meant she'd chosen his office not because it was convenient, but because she was certain it was hidden from whoever she was running from. It meant she'd been thinking like someone on the run for a while, not just a kid acting on impulse. "Lily, a staff badge means someone gave you access, or you took it from someone who works here. Either way, that's a big risk for both of us," Adrian said carefully. Her shoulders stiffened. "It's not like I had anywhere else to go." The edge in her voice was defensive, but underneath it, he could hear something else: weariness, maybe even desperation. She was too young to sound like that, and it unsettled him. "Why my office?" he asked, softening his tone. She shrugged, her eyes darting to the tall windows and the skyline beyond them. "Because it's high up and locked. Because I watched the cleaning staff once and saw they don't come in here when you're not around. Because people like you have places nobody else is allowed in." It was strange, hearing her speak with that kind of precision. She had studied the routines of this building, of his staff, and she'd done it well enough to slip past layers of security without being caught. Adrian leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "You realize you're asking me to trust you while you're keeping everything from me." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something unguarded. "I didn't come here to hurt you. I came here because it's the only place I could be invisible." And as much as Adrian wanted to press her for more, he couldn't ignore the truth in her voice. Adrian watched Lily as she stood near the window, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. She was quiet again, her arms wrapped around her backpack like it held her whole world. He had learned enough in business to know when someone was holding back, but with her, it wasn't about negotiation or leverage, it was about fear. She seemed to be weighing every word before speaking, as if the wrong sentence might bring trouble crashing down on her. He decided to try a different approach. "Lily, earlier you said I shouldn't tell your stepdad. Why? What is it about him that makes you so sure he can't know where you are?" She shifted uncomfortably, her gaze sliding away from his. "Because he's always watching." Adrian felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Watching you?" She nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the straps of her bag. "Tom, he notices everything. Where I go, who I talk to, what I say. If I'm late, even by a minute, he's waiting. And he says no one would believe me if I ever told anyone anything bad about him." The way she said his name made it sound like a shadow lingering in the room with them. Tom. Just a single syllable, but loaded with weight. Adrian leaned back slightly, his mind running through possibilities. There were patterns here, and none of them were good. He'd seen people use intimidation to maintain control before, but hearing it from a 12-year-old made his stomach tight. "Why wouldn't they believe you?" he asked carefully. Lily gave a small, humorless laugh. "Because he's good at pretending. He's nice to other people, always smiles, always helps out. He tells me that if I ever said anything, people would think I was lying or making trouble." Adrian studied her face, seeing the truth in her eyes. She wasn't dramatizing or inventing details to get sympathy. She was repeating something she had heard over and over, until it became part of the walls she lived inside. In his world, an accusation without proof could ruin someone's career, destroy reputations, and change lives forever. He knew how dangerous it was to assume, and he had seen firsthand how false claims could tear everything apart, but he also knew the signs of someone speaking from lived experience. Lily's posture, the way she flinched at sudden changes in his tone, the guarded way she spoke, all of it pointed to a kind of fear no child should have to carry. He didn't want to push her into saying more than she was ready to share, but he needed to understand what she was running from. "Has he hurt you?" he asked quietly. Lily's eyes flicked up to meet his, and for a heartbeat, he thought she might answer. Instead, she looked away, pressing her lips together and shaking her head slightly, not in denial, but in refusal to speak. Adrian exhaled slowly. He knew then that until he had proof, until she trusted him enough to tell the rest, all he had was a name and the heavy shadow it carried. And that shadow was already starting to spread into his world. Adrian sat at his desk long after Lily had gone quiet again, the hum of the city outside barely reaching the stillness of the room. His phone lay beside his hand, the screen dark, the number for child services already pulled up in his mind. He knew the logical thing to do. He was a mandated reporter as a business owner and as someone responsible for the safety of a minor in his home. It was the clear path, the clean solution. Call the authorities. Hand her over. Let the system do what it was designed to do. But then he looked over at her. She was curled into the corner of the sofa, her knees drawn up to her chest, her backpack still clutched tight. The way she watched the door made it seem like she expected it to burst open at any moment. Every sound from the hallway, a distant elevator chime, the murmur of a night guard on his rounds, made her shoulders tense. He imagined telling her he had called someone. Imagined the way her eyes would widen and her body would coil, ready to run. And he remembered her voice, low and steady, in a way that didn't belong to a child, saying, "He'll find me, if you tell." It wasn't a plea filled with drama or guessing, it was a statement of fact. It carried the certainty of someone who had already lived through what happened when the wrong people found her. Adrian turned his phone over in his palm, feeling the weight of it. He had the resources to make sure she was protected. His security team was well trained, his building was secure, and his own connections reached further than most. But the system wasn't perfect. He'd seen it fail good people before. And if she was right, if this stepdad, this Tom, had the reach and influence she believed he had, then a call to child services might not be protection at all. It might be a beacon telling Tom exactly where she was. He could hear Josephine's voice in his head, calm and practical, telling him not to take unnecessary risks. But there was another voice too, quieter, the one that remembered what it was like to be powerless in a world that didn't care about your side of the story. Lily's gaze met his suddenly, and for a moment he thought she had read his mind. "You were going to call someone," she said softly, not accusing, just stating. "I was thinking about it," he admitted. Her fingers tightened on her backpack. "If you do, I'll be gone before they get here." The certainty in her tone made him set the phone down. He didn't like making decisions without all the facts, but right now the risk of losing her was greater than the risk of waiting. "All right," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "No calls. Not tonight." She didn't thank him, but the tension in her shoulders eased just a little. And Adrian realized he had just made a promise he couldn't break, no matter what it cost him. The sound of running water drifted from the guest suite down the hall, steady and soft, almost masking the restless thoughts turning in Adrian's head. Lily had disappeared into the bathroom with a bundle of clean clothes Josephine had left out for her, and he knew he had only a short window before she emerged again. Her backpack sat on the bed where she had dropped it, the same worn canvas bag she had refused to let go of all night. He hesitated at the doorway, telling himself he was only looking to find identification, something that could tell him who she was beyond the fragments she had given. If he could put a full name to her face, maybe he could find out what she was running from without forcing her to talk before she was ready. He picked up the bag and unzipped it slowly, the faint smell of old paper and fabric softener rising from inside. There were no school books or notebooks, nothing to suggest a normal life. Instead, he found a crumpled sweatshirt, a small wallet with no ID, a pack of gum, and at the very bottom, a USB drive. It was black, scuffed, and had a small piece of white tape wrapped around it. Written in black marker, in uneven letters, was one word: proof. Adrian turned it over in his hand, feeling the weight of the word more than the object. He moved to the desk in the corner of the room and slid the drive into his laptop. The folder that appeared was sparse, 2 subfolders labeled videos and docs. He clicked the first. A series of file names popped up, each a date and timestamp. He tried opening one, but the screen filled with static colors and distorted sound before freezing completely. The same thing happened with the next. They weren't damaged, just encrypted. The documents in the other folder were no different. Dozens of files, all locked behind the same barrier. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the word proof written on the tape. Proof of what? Proof of who? The presence of hidden camera footage was clear from the naming conventions: room numbers, angles, time codes, but without the right decryption key. All he had was evidence of something without being able to see the truth it held. The shower shut off. He pulled the drive from the laptop and slipped it back into her bag exactly where he'd found it, careful to leave no sign that it had been touched. As much as he wanted answers, he couldn't risk her finding out he had gone through her things before she trusted him. A few minutes later, Lily emerged in the oversized sweatshirt and clean leggings, her hair damp and combed back. She glanced at the bag on the bed, then at him, and for a second he thought he saw suspicion flicker in her eyes. Adrian forced a calm smile. "Feel better?" She nodded, but kept her hand on the backpack as she sat down. Whatever was on that drive, it was important enough for her to carry it everywhere. And Adrian knew now that the truth she was hiding was buried in those encrypted files, and that unlocking them might change everything. Adrian waited until the house was quiet. Lily had fallen asleep in the guest room, the backpack resting on the floor beside her bed, her hand dangling over it like she was keeping guard even in her dreams. He stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to her slow breathing, before stepping away and heading to his own office. The USB drive was in his pocket, exactly where he had placed it earlier when she wasn't looking. He told himself this was about protecting her. If the files on the drive were dangerous, he needed to know before someone else found them. His office lights glowed softly against the dark city skyline as he slid the drive into his secure laptop. Years of building his company had made him cautious, but years of defending it from cyber attacks had made him skilled. The encryption was strong, far beyond what an average person could crack, but it wasn't beyond him. He worked slowly, methodically, peeling back layers of security that were designed to stop almost anyone. Whoever had created this lock knew what they were doing, which only made him more certain the contents were valuable and dangerous. The first file he managed to open wasn't a video. It was a spreadsheet, plain and unremarkable at first glance, but the numbers told a different story. Columns of transactions funneled through different accounts, shifting currencies hidden under shell companies. Offshore accounts appeared in places like the Cayman Islands, Belize, and Malta, the kind of locations people used when they wanted their money invisible. The amounts were staggering, millions moving in regular intervals, each one linked to an account name that was clearly false. As he scrolled further, certain transactions caught his attention. Some were tagged with initials, others with coded phrases that looked harmless, but carried patterns he recognized from corporate espionage cases he had studied. He dug deeper, breaking into a folder marked with nothing but a single letter. Inside were scanned documents, signed contracts, falsified invoices, and what looked like identity papers for people who didn't exist. The more he saw, the clearer it became. This wasn't simply a case of a man abusing his stepdaughter. This was about organized financial crime, a network moving enormous amounts of money under the radar. Then he found the coded messages. They were short, each one appearing as an ordinary email draft between harmless addresses. But running them through a simple cipher revealed something else: drop dates, locations, and the movement of both money and people. Some of the dates were recent, others were in the next few days. He sat back in his chair, the weight of what he was seeing pressing heavily on him. If Lily had stolen this drive, she was carrying evidence that could put people in prison for decades. It also meant those same people would do anything to get it back. Adrian removed the drive and locked it in his desk safe, his mind already racing through possibilities. This was no longer about keeping Lily safe for the night. This was about keeping her alive, long enough for the truth to matter. Adrian knew he needed help, and there was only one person he trusted completely in situations that required patience and intuition. Josephine Chen had worked for his family since before he'd even started his company. She had seen him at his worst and never wavered, and she had a way of talking to people that made them feel safe. If anyone could get Lily to open up without frightening her, it was Josephine. He called her just after sunrise. She arrived less than an hour later, dressed in her usual neat attire, her silver hair pinned back, her sharp eyes taking in everything the moment she stepped inside. Adrian gave her the bare bones of the situation as they walked toward the guest suite. He didn't mention the USB drive, only that the girl was scared, guarded, and clearly running from something she didn't want to talk about. Josephine knocked gently before entering the room. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the bed, still in the sweatshirt from the night before, her damp hair now tangled again. She glanced up warily at the sight of a stranger, but didn't pull away when Josephine approached. "Good morning, Lily," Josephine said softly, as if she'd known her for years. "I made tea. Do you drink tea?" Lily hesitated, then gave a small nod. Josephine set the tray down and poured 2 cups, handing one to the girl before taking a seat in the armchair across from the bed. She didn't ask questions right away. Instead, she talked about small things: the weather, the early traffic, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the street. Lily listened, sipping slowly, her posture loosening just enough to show she was listening. After a few minutes, Josephine said, "Adrian tells me you needed somewhere safe to be last night. That's all right. We've all needed safe places before." Lily looked down at her tea. "Not everyone finds one," she murmured. "That's true," Josephine agreed. "But you found this one. So maybe we start with that. How did you know where to come?" Lily's fingers tightened around the cup. "I can't tell you everything." "You don't have to," Josephine said, her tone warm and calm. "Just tell me what you want me to know." There was a pause before Lily said, "I knew it was high up, locked. I knew no one would come in at night, and I knew my stepdad wouldn't think to look for me here." Josephine didn't react sharply to the mention of the stepdad, only asked gently, "What's his name?" "Tom," Lily said quietly. "He's always there, even when he's not in the room. It's like he's still watching." Josephine nodded slowly, not pushing further. She let the silence stretch until Lily added, almost reluctantly, "He says no one would believe me if I talked. That's why I don't." When Adrian returned to the room, Josephine met his eyes over Lily's bowed head. She didn't need to say the words. There was something here, something deep, and earning the girl's trust would take time. But Josephine had already begun the work. Adrian waited until Josephine had taken Lily to the kitchen for breakfast, before slipping back into his office and unlocking the desk safe. The USB drive sat inside, harmless in appearance, but he knew the truth it carried was anything but. He plugged it into his secure laptop again, the encryption already broken from his work the night before, and began digging deeper into the folders he hadn't explored yet. The more he opened, the more a picture began to form. Transactions that looked ordinary at first glance began to link together like pieces of a puzzle. Offshore accounts moved large sums in carefully timed intervals, the money passing through 3 or 4 companies before landing in hidden destinations. Each company had a different name, but their registration details connected them like branches from the same rotten root. Adrian focused on one in particular, a shell corporation registered in a small Caribbean island. The documents showed it had been used to move over $4 million in the last year alone. At first, he assumed it was just another anonymous front, until he saw the name of one of the intermediary accounts it had passed through, an account tied to his own company's corporate structure. He froze, scrolling back to make sure he hadn't imagined it. The account was legitimate, used for overseas vendor payments, but there was no record in his official books of these transfers. Someone had funneled illicit funds through his company without his knowledge, using the clean reputation of his business as a shield. A chill settled in his chest as he thought of Lily's stepdad. The name Tom appeared multiple times in the documents, sometimes as an authorized signatory, sometimes hidden in email trails with vague subject lines. The emails he decrypted were short and to the point, filled with coded phrases about packages, clearing routes, and washing cycles. Adrian had seen enough cases in his cybersecurity work to recognize the language. It was laundering terminology, dressed up to look like harmless logistics. Tom wasn't just an abusive man keeping control over a frightened child. He was a mid-level operator in a larger network, one that moved millions through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. The files made it clear he wasn't at the top. He took orders from others, passed instructions down to those below him, but he was high enough to have access to accounts, contacts, and strategies that could damage anyone caught in his path. And now Adrian's company was part of that path. His mind raced through the implications. If law enforcement discovered those transfers without context, the investigation would start with him. His reputation could be destroyed before he had a chance to explain, and the network would have the perfect scapegoat. He shut the laptop and leaned back, pressing his hands over his face. This wasn't just about helping a frightened girl anymore. It was about clearing his own name before Tom's people decided he was expendable. And if the files were right, time was already running out. Adrian stared at the closed laptop, the faint hum of the cooling fan fading into the silence of his office. He had seen enough in those files to understand the danger. The connection between his company and Tom's network wasn't glaring. It was subtle, carefully buried under legitimate transactions and vendor accounts, but it was there. And if anyone decided to dig deep enough, they would find it. It was the kind of link that could be explained away as an error, a fluke of accounting, something that had slipped through unnoticed in the chaos of running a global business. But Adrian knew better. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately routed money through his company's infrastructure, knowing it would give the transfers an appearance of legitimacy. His reputation, his business, and everything he had built were now part of a laundering chain he had never agreed to be in. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking about how it would look if this came to light. Competitors would seize on the scandal, clients would cut ties to avoid the taint, and the media would circle like vultures. Even if he proved his innocence, the damage would be done. Public opinion didn't wait for court verdicts, it decided guilt in headlines. What unsettled him most was how precise the infiltration had been. Whoever had orchestrated this had studied his company's systems, learned the flow of funds, and picked the perfect accounts to piggyback on. They'd chosen a vendor account with minimal oversight, one that processed irregular payments to overseas contractors, so the unusual amounts wouldn't stand out at first glance. The way the money moved in and out made it blend almost seamlessly into the background noise of legitimate operations. Tom's name appearing in the chain of transfers wasn't bold, it was almost casual, like someone confident he would never be exposed. It told Adrian that Tom believed he had the right kind of protection, connections, influence, and the ability to make problems disappear. Adrian leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation pressing against his chest. He had built his company on precision and security. Yet here was a breach that had slipped past every safeguard he'd put in place. And now a 12-year-old girl was sitting in his home because she had seen or heard something she shouldn't have, carrying proof on a USB drive that could both save and destroy him. The link was thin enough that, with careful maneuvering, he could cut it before anyone else noticed. But if Tom or the people above him sensed Adrian was onto them, they could easily make that link stronger, adding fabricated records, fake approvals, anything to make it look like he was an active participant. He knew then that waiting wasn't an option. He had to act quietly, gathering his own proof before they realized he had found theirs. Because once they did, they wouldn't just come for the files. They would come for Lily, and for him, and they wouldn't care who got caught in the crossfire. Adrian found Lily in the kitchen with Josephine, her small hands wrapped around a mug of tea she barely seemed to notice. She was staring out the window at the skyline, her shoulders tense, as if she was bracing herself for something she couldn't see. Josephine gave Adrian a small nod before slipping out, leaving them alone. He took the seat across from her, careful not to crowd her, and waited until she looked up. "You've told me some things about your stepdad," he said quietly, "but I need to understand more. You said he's always watching. What did you mean?" Lily's eyes shifted, not in avoidance, but in calculation, as if she was deciding how much she could give him without making things worse for herself. "It's not just him," she said finally. "He has friends, people who watch me when he's not around. They act like they're just neighbors or customers or people at the store, but they're not. They know where I go and who I talk to. Sometimes they tell him things before I even get home." Adrian's stomach tightened. This wasn't the paranoia of a frightened child. There was a sharpness in her voice, the precision of someone who had learned the patterns of a threat over time. "How do you know they're watching you?" "Because they're always there," she said simply. "Different faces, but they do the same things. One will follow me into a shop and pretend to look at something. Another will be outside when I come out. If I turn down a street I don't usually go down, I'll see one of them on the corner. And when Tom gets home, he'll ask questions about things I didn't tell him." Adrian didn't interrupt. He could feel her slowly working towards something important, and he didn't want to break her rhythm. "I used to think if I stayed quiet they'd leave me alone," she went on. "If I didn't say anything, didn't look at anyone, didn't go anywhere without permission, it would be easier. But last week," she stopped, her grip tightening on the mug. "I heard him talking on the phone. He thought I was asleep. He told someone the final drop was happening soon. He said after that, everything would be clean and untouchable." Adrian kept his expression neutral, though his mind was already racing. Final drop? In laundering operations, that often meant the last stage of moving funds before they were locked away, beyond the reach of investigators. "I didn't know what it meant exactly," Lily said, "but I knew it was bad. And I knew if he finished whatever it was, it would be harder for anyone to stop him." She looked straight at him now, her voice steady. "That's why I took the USB. I'd seen him use it before. He plugged it into his laptop and typed something, then told the person on the phone everything was ready. I thought if I had it maybe it would slow him down, or maybe someone else could use it to stop him." Adrian realized then that this girl hadn't just run away. She had made a calculated move in a dangerous game. And now that she had involved herself, she was in far deeper than she even understood. Adrian returned to his office as soon as Lily was settled with Josephine again. The word, "final drop," kept echoing in his head, pulling him back to the encrypted files on the USB. He powered up his laptop, opened the folders he had already breached, and began searching for anything tied to dates. It didn't take long before he found it. an email draft hidden in a folder that looked like it belonged to a photo archive. The message was short, just a few lines of text in a code he recognized from earlier files. When he ran it through the cipher, the meaning became painfully clear. The final drop was set for exactly 72 hours from now. His eyes tracked the rest of the decrypted lines. The operation would involve moving millions of dollars from accounts already in play to a final offshore destination. Once the transfer was complete, the funds would vanish into a layered network of holding companies, trusts, and numbered accounts that could hide the money indefinitely. The last chilling detail was a reference to a clean trail that would protect the network while leaving a designated scapegoat to take the fall. The scapegoat's identifier matched one of Adrian's own legitimate corporate account numbers. He sat back, the weight of it settling hard in his chest. If this went through, the money trail would lead directly to him. Anyone investigating would see his company's account as the last legitimate point before the transfer, and the documents Tom's people had already planted would make it look like he had orchestrated the entire thing. Adrian rubbed his temples, his mind moving fast. He could take the files straight to the police, but that wasn't as simple as it sounded. The moment this network realized he had exposed them, Lily would be their first target. She had already said Tom had people watching her, people who could move quickly. Turning her over to the authorities wasn't a guarantee of safety either. Not if Tom's influence reached into places it shouldn't. The other problem was evidence. What he had now was damning, but without context, it was still circumstantial. He needed a way to catch them in the act, to intercept the drop before it happened, and to make sure every person involved was tied to it without question. He stared at the clock on his desk, calculating backwards from the deadline. 72 hours wasn't much time to plan something that could outmaneuver a network this careful. He would need resources, trusted allies, and a plan airtight enough to hold even if they realized what he was doing. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo, grainy, taken from a distance, but it was unmistakably Lily, sitting at the kitchen table with Josephine. The caption read, "You can't keep her hidden forever." Adrian's grip tightened around the phone. The message was clear. They knew she was with him. And now, with the clock ticking toward the final drop, every second mattered. He would have to move fast, but he would also have to move carefully, because one wrong step could destroy them both. Adrian didn't waste time after the threatening photo arrived. He called his head of private security and gave precise instructions, his voice low and sharp. Within the hour, the security team had swept his estate, checking every camera, every gate, and every blind spot. He wasn't about to risk leaving Lily in a place where anyone could get close enough to take her picture again. He found her in the living room with Josephine, sketching quietly on a pad of paper. She looked up when he entered, her eyes searching his face for clues. He crouched down so he was at her level, keeping his voice steady. "Lily, we're moving you to another part of the house, somewhere safer. You'll be monitored, and no one can get to you without going through me and my team." Her brow furrowed. "Safe like the police say they'll make you safe?" she asked, her tone wary, almost challenging. "No," Adrian said, shaking his head. "Safe like my safe. This isn't a promise on paper. It's something I can control." She studied him for a moment before glancing back at her sketch. People always say that until they can't keep it. He understood more than he wanted to admit. "I'm not them," he said firmly. "I don't make promises I can't keep." The safe room was on the lower level of his estate, hidden behind a reinforced wall disguised as a wine cellar. The air was cool, the lighting soft, and the space was furnished like a small apartment, comfortable but secure. The walls were layered with soundproofing and steel, the doors reinforced, and every inch was covered by his own closed system of surveillance cameras that couldn't be accessed from outside. As they walked in, Lily's eyes moved over everything, lingering on the monitors that displayed views of the surrounding property. "So you can see everything from here?" she asked. "Yes," Adrian said, And so can my security team. No one gets in or out without me knowing. She set her backpack on the sofa but didn't sit. Instead, she stood near the far wall, arms crossed, scanning the room like she was trying to memorize every exit and blind spot. Tom's good at finding ways around things, she said after a pause. He knows people who can make locks useless. He knows how to get people to open doors for him. Adrian stepped closer, keeping his tone calm but certain. Then we'll make sure there's nothing for him to get around, and no one here opens doors for him. You won't have to see him again. Her expression didn't soften, but she nodded once, like she was willing to wait and see if his words meant anything. As he left her to settle in, Adrian lingered at the heavy steel door before it closed. He knew she didn't believe him yet. Not fully. Promises had been broken too many times in her world. But he intended to prove this one, no matter what it took, because he only had 72 hours to keep her safe and dismantle the threat closing in on both of them. Adrian gathered Josephine and Mark Danner, his most trusted security tech, in his office late that night. The door was locked, the blinds drawn, and every device in the room was swept for bugs before they spoke. Lily was in the safe room, monitored by 2 guards outside the reinforced door, unaware of the plan forming upstairs. Adrian knew the risk they were taking, but with the deadline closing in, this was the only way to protect her and take Tom's network down at the same time. Mark leaned over the table, scanning the decrypted files Adrian had pulled from the USB. They've set up everything for the transfer, he said, tapping a folder filled with coded instructions. If we swap in our own data at the right moment, the entire drop will reroute to the accounts we control. Not our accounts, Adrian corrected, his tone firm. Law enforcement's. I'm already talking to the right people. They'll be ready to freeze the funds and trace every account back to the source. Josephine folded her hands, her gaze steady on Adrian. And while they're chasing the money, you'll be cleared. The paper trail will show you never touched a cent. Exactly, Adrian said. But it has to look real. If Tom or the people above him even suspect the drop's been tampered with before it's complete, they'll shut everything down and disappear. We have one shot at this. Mark began laying out the steps on his laptop. They would let the network believe the drop was going ahead exactly as planned. The files containing the transfer instructions would remain untouched until the last possible moment, when Mark would insert the doctored data. To anyone inside the network, it would look like the money had reached its final offshore destination, until they tried to move it again and found themselves locked out, with federal agents waiting. The bigger challenge was making sure Adrian's systems didn't look like they had been altered from his side. We'll use one of their own backdoor access points to slip the data in, Mark explained. That way, if they look, they'll assume the change came from inside their own operation. Adrian nodded, already picturing how Tom's face would look when he realized the trap had sprung. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about leverage. Once the transfer was intercepted, they would have proof strong enough to bring the entire network down, not just Tom. Josephine's voice broke through his thoughts. And Lily? Adrian met her gaze. She stays in the safe room until it's over. No one gets near her. If they realize what we've done, she'll be their first target. Mark closed his laptop with a decisive snap. Then we'd better make sure they don't realize it until it's too late. As they finalized the plan, Adrian felt the tension in his chest shift into focus. The clock was still ticking, but for the first time since this began, he wasn't just reacting, he was setting the terms, and if everything went the way he intended, Tom's people would walk straight into the kind of trap they'd never escape from. Adrian was in the middle of a security briefing with Mark when one of the guards buzzed through from the front desk. His tone was calm, but edged with caution. "There's a man here asking to see you, Mr. Vale. Says it's about his stepdaughter." Adrian's stomach tightened. "What's his name?" "Tom." The name alone was enough to send a ripple of tension through the room. Adrian told Mark to keep the team on standby, then took the elevator down to the lobby. He found Tom standing just beyond the security desk, dressed in a clean button-down and pressed slacks, his hair neatly combed. He looked like the picture of a responsible guardian, polite smile, open posture, even holding a manila folder, as if he were there for something routine. "Mr. Vale," Tom said warmly, stepping forward with his hand outstretched. "I'm glad you could come down. We need to talk about Lily." Adrian didn't take the hand. "There's nothing to talk about." Tom chuckled softly, the kind of sound meant to make a listener feel silly for resisting. "She's a good kid, but she's been through a lot. Sometimes she runs off, tells people things that aren't quite true. You know how kids can be." Adrian kept his expression neutral. "I know she came to me scared. I know she doesn't want to see you." The smile never faltered, but Tom's eyes sharpened. "She's unstable. The social worker can confirm it. I've got her file right here, school reports, behavioral notes. She needs structure, and I can give her that. She's probably told you some wild stories, but I'm her legal guardian." "Legal doesn't mean right," Adrian said flatly. "And until I know she's safe, she's staying where she is." The mask slipped, just a fraction. Tom's voice dropped lower, the warmth replaced by a quiet warning. "You don't want to get involved in something you don't understand. This could get messy for you. I'd hate to see your name in the middle of a custody battle. Or worse." Adrian stepped closer, his tone even but edged. "You're right about one thing. I don't understand everything yet. But I understand enough to know you're not getting near her." The guard behind the desk moved subtly, placing himself between them. Adrian nodded to him. "Show Mr. Tom out." Tom's jaw tightened, but he didn't fight it. He allowed himself to be escorted toward the glass doors, turning once to look back at Adrian. The smile returned, but this time it was colder, the kind that carried a promise rather than warmth. "This isn't over," he said quietly, before stepping outside. Adrian watched him cross the sidewalk and disappear into a dark sedan waiting at the curb. Every instinct told him the man wouldn't stop here. The visit hadn't been about reclaiming Lily. It had been about sending a message. Tom wanted Adrian to know he could walk right up to his building, that he wasn't afraid to be seen, and now Adrian knew, without a doubt, that the clock was ticking faster than ever. The rain started just after sunset, a steady mist that coated the city in a damp haze. Adrian stood in his office, looking out over the skyline while his phone buzzed quietly on the desk beside him. Every message that came through was short, precise, and to the point. Law enforcement was in position. The secure servers were ready. The drop was set to begin. Downstairs, plainclothes agents blended into the flow of people in the lobby. Across the city, others sat in unmarked cars, watching addresses tied to Tom's network. The operation had been coordinated to the second. If one part failed, the rest would crumble. Mark sat at Adrian's desk, his fingers moving across the keyboard as he monitored the transfer system. The doctor data they had inserted earlier that day was ready to trigger at the exact moment Tom's people initiated the drop. Once the funds moved, they would land in accounts controlled by law enforcement, not the offshore havens the network expected. At exactly 9:15, the first alert flashed on Mark's screen. "They're in," he said, his voice calm but tight with focus. "Starting the transfer now." Adrian leaned over his shoulder, watching as the numbers rolled across the screen. Millions of dollars shifting from account to account in quick succession. To anyone on the other side, it would look like everything was going according to plan. But Adrian could see the markers embedded in each transfer, invisible to them, but lighting up in real time for the agents who were watching. The second alert came at 9:22. Another team reported that 2 of Tom's associates had just arrived at a secure location downtown, where they were supposed to verify the completion of the drop. The agents waiting nearby moved in closer, careful not to spook them too soon. By 9:30, the final stage began. The largest transfer yet moved in a single block, bouncing twice before hitting what the network thought was their final destination. Mark's fingers flew over the keys, confirming the diversion was active. And, "They're hooked," he said, leaning back. "Funds locked. They can't pull them back now." Adrian's phone lit up with another message from the lead agent. "We have them. Proceeding with arrests." Across the city, agents moved in. The downtown team intercepted Tom's men before they could leave the building. Another group hit a warehouse tied to the operation, seizing computers and hard drives. Every step was recorded, every piece of evidence catalogued. The pattern was unmistakable. Tom's network was part of a laundering chain, stretching across multiple countries. Adrian stayed by the window, watching the rain blur the lights below, as the reality of it sank in. It wasn't over yet. Tom himself was still out there. But this was the first real blow. They hadn't just taken his money. They had taken his security, his untouchable status. In the safe room below, Lily had no idea the drop was happening tonight. But Adrian thought of her as he watched the city, knowing that every account seized, every arrest made, brought them one step closer to ending the shadow that had followed her for so long. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the city washed clean and quiet. Adrian stood in the kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee, the scent of it curling into the air as the television in the background replayed the news. Tom's face appeared on the screen, grainy footage of him being led into a federal building in handcuffs. The anchor spoke about charges of money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy, about a network dismantled in a single coordinated operation. Adrian muted the sound and let the image fade. He didn't need the news to tell him what had happened. He had been there for every step of it. Josephine came in from the hall, her voice low so as not to wake Lily, though Adrian suspected she was already up. "They've confirmed he's not getting out on bail," Josephine said. "The rest of them too. It's over." Adrian nodded, but his mind was already on what came next. With Tom in custody and the network exposed, the question of Lily's future couldn't be ignored any longer. Social services had called earlier, saying they had located a distant aunt willing to take her. It was the safe, official choice. It was also the choice that would send her to a stranger's home in another state, away from everything she had just begun to trust. When Lily finally appeared in the doorway, still in the oversized sweatshirt she'd taken to sleeping in, she looked from Adrian to Josephine and back again. "You've been talking about me," she said. Adrian set his cup down. "We've been talking about what happens now. You have family, an aunt. She's offered to take you in." Lily's eyes dropped to the floor. "I don't know her." "I know," he said gently. "It would be a new place, a different start. No Tom, no people watching you." She didn't speak for a moment, then looked up at him. "If I go there, will you check on me?" "Of course," he said without hesitation. Her brow furrowed, as if she was thinking through a puzzle. "And if I stay here?" Adrian felt Josephine watching him, but kept his eyes on Lily. "If you stay here, it means this is your home. Not just for now, but for as long as you want it to be. It means I'm not just someone who helped you for a few days. It means I'm here, every day, to make sure you're safe." She studied him in silence. "Not because you have to, not because I have to," he said. "Because I want to." Something in her posture shifted, the wary stiffness loosening just enough for her to take a step closer. "Then, I want to stay. Not because you saved me, because you listened when no one else would." Josephine smiled softly, and Adrian felt a weight lift from his chest. He didn't say anything right away, just nodded once, letting her know the choice was hers and he would honor it. And in that moment, the house didn't just feel safe, it felt like home. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.